Moonbinders dead. Evan Corbin had always known the moon pulled at her differently, that the wind carried whispers meant only for her. But when the sky turned silver and her skin burned with unseen marks, she felt it the past wrapping itself around her like chains. The torches flickered. The air thickened. And then he stepped forward, golden-eyed and waiting. "You were never meant to be free," he murmured. "You were meant to be mine." Chapter 1. The Whispers of Stillwater Creek. The late afternoon sun cast long, dancing shadows across the porch of Evan the Corbin's newly inherited cottage. Stillwater Creek, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, was a world away from the sterile, predictable life she'd known in Boston. 57 years, a lifetime spent suppressing the unsettling whispers that only she seemed to hear, the odd pull of the moon, the inexplicable way the wind seemed to carry secrets meant just for her ears. Now, widowed and unmoored, she'd returned to the place her grandmother, Alara, had fled from decades ago, a place Alara had only spoken of in hushed, fearful tones. Evan ran a hand over the weathered wood of the porch railing, the scent of pine and damp earth filling her lungs. It was a scent both foreign and familiar, a scent that tugged at something deep within her, something she couldn't quite name. Alara had warned her about Stillwater, about the unnaturalness that clung to the air, about the old families and their even older secrets. But Evan, ever the pragmatist, had dismissed it as the ramblings of an old woman steeped in superstition. Now, standing here, the silence broken only by the rustling leaves and the gentle gurgle of the creek, she felt a prickle of unease, a sense that Alara's warnings might have held more truth than she'd cared to admit. The cottage itself was a relic of a bygone era. Built of sturdy, hand-hewn logs, it seemed to have grown organically from the surrounding forest. The windows, small and paned with wavy glass, offered glimpses into a dim, dust-laden interior. Evan had spent the last few days clearing out the accumulated debris of decades, uncovering forgotten treasures and unsettling reminders of a past she'd never known. Old, leather-bound journals filled with Alara's elegant script, detailing a life that seemed both impossibly romantic and deeply tragic. Pressed flowers, brittle and faded, marking passages about moonlit walks and whispered promises. And, most disturbingly, a silver ring, intricately carved with a crescent moon and a wolf's head, hidden away in a locked drawer. The ring. It was the ring that had truly unsettled her. When she'd first slipped it onto her finger, a jolt of energy, cold and sharp, had shot through her, leaving her breathless and strangely dizzy. She'd quickly removed it, tucking it back into its hiding place, but the feeling, the memory of that icy jolt, lingered. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of lavender and rose, Evan found herself drawn to the creek that gave the town its name. The water flowed clear and cold, reflecting the fading light like a ribbon of liquid silver. She sat on a smooth, moss-covered rock, letting the cool spray mist her face. The air grew heavy, the whispers of the wind intensifying, weaving themselves into a low, almost melodic hum. "You shouldn't be here," a voice said, startling her. Evan jumped, her heart pounding. She turned to see an elderly woman standing on the opposite bank, her face etched with deep lines, her eyes, the color of faded denim, fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. She wore a simple, homespun dress, a shawl draped around her shoulders, and her silver hair was braided down her back. I'm sorry," Evan stammered. "I didn't realize I was trespassing." The woman shook her head slowly. "This isn't about trespassing, child. This is about belonging. And you don't belong here. This is my grandmother's house," Evan said, her voice trembling slightly. "Alara Corbin's house." The woman's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been fear crossing her face. "Alara's granddaughter? You look like her. The same eyes, the same stubborn chin." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Evan, lingering on her hands. "You have the mark, don't you?" Evan instinctively tucked her hands behind her back, a shiver crawling down her spine. "I don't know what you're talking about." The woman sighed, a sound like the rustling of dry leaves. The moon will show you. It always does. The Corbins are bound to this place, to its curse. You can't escape it, child, no matter how far you run. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the gathering shadows as quickly and silently as she'd appeared. Evan watched her go, her mind racing. Curse? Mark? What was this woman talking about? She looked down at her hands, turning them over and over, examining them in the fading light. There was nothing there, just the faint lines of age and the delicate tracery of veins. But as the moon, a sliver of silver in the darkening sky, rose above the trees, a faint tingling sensation began in her left hand, spreading slowly up her arm. She looked down, her breath catching in her throat. On the back of her hand, just below her wrist, a faint, silvery mark was beginning to emerge, a crescent moon, barely visible, but undeniably there. It was the same shape, the same intricate design as the carving on the silver ring. The air thickened, pressing down on her. The wind carried a new whisper. It was a name, low and rough and full of power, Caspian. A name that belonged with the silver torches, the heavy air, the waiting. Chapter 2. Echoes in the ancestral home. The air inside the cottage felt different after her encounter by the creek. Heavier, somehow, charged with an unseen energy that made the hairs on Avant's arms stand on end. The familiar scent of dust and old wood was now laced with something else, something wild and untamed, like the scent of a forest after a rainstorm. She lit a few oil lamps, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, revealing the intricate details of the room, the hand-carved mantelpiece above the fireplace, the faded floral wallpaper, the worn rug on the wooden floor. Evan moved through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Each object she touched, each piece of furniture, seemed to hum with a faint vibration, a whisper of the past. She found herself drawn to the library, a small, book-lined room at the back of the cottage. The shelves were filled with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked and faded, their pages filled with the delicate script of generations past. She pulled a book at random from the shelf, its cover worn smooth with age. It was a journal, its pages filled with Alara's handwriting. The entry she'd stumbled upon was dated almost 70 years ago, a day in late autumn, much like this one. The moon is full tonight, Alara had written, and the whispers are louder than ever. He came to me again, by the creek, his eyes like molten gold in the moonlight. He told me he loved me, that I was his, that the bond between us was unbreakable. But I know the truth. He is a creature of the shadows, bound to this place, to its curse. And I am bound to him. Avant's heart pounded in her chest. The words echoed her own unsettling encounter, the woman's warning, the emerging mark on her hand. He is a creature of the shadows bound to this place, to its curse. Who was this he? And what was this curse that seemed to hang over Stillwater Creek like a shroud? She continued to read, flipping through the pages, devouring Alara's words, her fears, her hopes, her forbidden love. The journal entries painted a vivid picture of a young woman torn between her duty to her family and her undeniable attraction to a man who was both captivating and dangerous. A man named Caspian, a name that sent shivers down Avant's spine. As she read, Evan noticed a recurring symbol throughout the journal, a crescent moon intertwined with a wolf's head, the same symbol that was carved on the silver ring. It was often accompanied by the phrase moonbound, a word that seemed to carry a weight of both longing and despair. She found a small, wooden box tucked away on a high shelf. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a collection of dried herbs and flowers, along with a small, silver locket. The locket was engraved with the same moon and wolf symbol. Evan opened it carefully, her fingers trembling. Inside, there were 2 miniature portraits. One was of a young woman, undoubtedly Alara, her eyes sparkling with youthful defiance. The other was of a man, his face strikingly handsome, his eyes, even in the faded portrait, possessing an intensity that made Avant's breath catch in her throat. He had dark, wavy hair, high cheekbones, and a mouth that curved in a hint of a smile. It was a smile that seemed to hold both promise and danger. His eyes. They were the color of molten gold.
Caspian.
Evan closed the locket, her hand shaking. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they were forming was far more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. She was connected to this man, to this curse, through her grandmother, through the blood that flowed in her veins. A sudden noise from outside startled her. A branch scraping against the window, perhaps, or the rustle of leaves in the wind. But it sounded different, closer, more deliberate. She held her breath, listening intently. The silence stretched, broken only by the frantic beating of her own heart. Then she heard it again. A soft, almost imperceptible scratching at the front door. A scratching that sounded less like an animal and more like fingernails. A slow, deliberate drag of claws. It paused, then came again. Evan felt a wave of cold dread wash over her, a primal fear that tightened her chest and made it difficult to breathe. Who, or what was outside? She crept through the house and listened. Silence. Then a low growl thrummed from beyond the thick wood of the door, a sound that vibrated deep in her bones and spoke of something ancient, powerful, and utterly, terrifyingly close. Chapter 3. The silver mark emerges. Evan backed away from the door, her hand pressed against her mouth to stifle a gasp. The growl had faded, replaced by an unnerving silence that felt even more menacing. She peered through the small, dusty window pane beside the door, but the darkness outside was impenetrable, revealing nothing but the faint reflection of her own terrified face. The rational part of her brain tried to reassure her. It was just an animal, a stray dog, perhaps, or a raccoon scavenging for food. But the primal fear that had gripped her refused to be silenced. The growl had been too deep, too resonant, too human-like. And the scratching it had sounded deliberate, purposeful, as if something was trying to get in. She forced herself to take a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She needed to be rational, to think clearly. She was alone, miles from the nearest town, with no phone service and no way to call for help. She had to rely on herself. She remembered the old, rusty shotgun she'd found in the attic, tucked away in a dusty trunk along with other forgotten relics of the past. It was probably useless, more likely to explode than to fire, but it was the only weapon she had. She crept up the creaking stairs, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight, the silence of the house amplifying every sound. The attic was a dimly lit, claustrophobic space, filled with cobwebs and the musty scent of decay. Dust motes danced in the faint beams of moonlight that filtered through the small, grimy window. Evan rummaged through the trunk, her hands brushing against old clothes, moth-eaten blankets, and brittle photographs. Finally, her fingers closed around the cold, metal barrel of the shotgun. It was heavier than she'd expected, the wood stock worn smooth with age. She checked the chamber, finding it empty, as she'd suspected. Still, the feel of the weapon in her hands gave her a small measure of comfort, a sense of control in a situation that felt increasingly out of control. As she turned to leave the attic, a sudden movement caught her eye. A flicker of silver in the moonlight, a faint glimmer on the back of her left hand. She held her hand up, her breath catching in her throat. The mark, the crescent moon that had been barely visible before, was now glowing with a soft, silvery light. It was no longer a faint outline, but a clearly defined symbol, intricate and detailed, pulsing with an energy that she could feel tingling in her veins. The mark seemed to be reacting to something, responding to some unseen force. Evan felt a strange pull, a sense of urgency, as if the mark was trying to guide her, to lead her somewhere. She looked around the attic, her eyes scanning the shadows, trying to discern the source of the pull. Her gaze fell upon a small, wooden chest tucked away in a dark corner. It was a chest she hadn't noticed before, hidden beneath a pile of old quilts. She felt an inexplicable urge to open it, a sense that it held something important, something connected to the mark, to the curse, to Caspian. She knelt down, her heart pounding, and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, Nestled on a bed of faded velvet was a single object, a book, bound in thick, dark leather, its cover embossed with the same moon and wolf symbol that was now glowing on her hand. The air around the book seemed to shimmer, to vibrate with the same energy that was coursing through her veins. As she reached for the book, the silvery light of the mark intensified, illuminating the attic with an ethereal glow. The wind outside picked up, howling through the trees, rattling the windows of the cottage. The scratching at the door started again, louder this time, more insistent, accompanied by a low, guttural growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. A voice, smooth as aged whiskey and cold as the mountain air, whispered from the other side of the wood, "Let me in, Evan. Let me in, moonbound." Chapter 4. A glimpse of golden eyes. Evan froze, the book clutched tightly in her hands. The voice, though muffled by the thick wooden door, was unmistakable. It was the same voice that had haunted her dreams since she'd arrived in Stillwater Creek, the same voice that had whispered her name on the wind. Caspian. Her mind raced, struggling to reconcile the terrifying reality of the situation with the romantic, albeit dangerous, figure from her grandmother's journals. This wasn't a story anymore. This was real. And she was trapped. The scratching intensified, the growls growing louder, more ferocious. The door rattled in its frame, the wood groaning under the pressure. Evan knew it wouldn't hold for long. She had to do something, anything. She scrambled back, her eyes darting around the attic, searching for an escape. The only window was small and boarded up, offering no way out. The only other exit was the narrow staircase leading back down into the house, back towards the terrifying presence at the front door. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing pulse. She had the shotgun, useless as it might be. And she had the book, the one that seemed to be the key to understanding this curse, this connection to Caspian. "Who are you?" she called out, her voice trembling, surprised by its own thread of steel. "What do you want?" The scratching stopped. The growling subsided. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick and heavy with anticipation. Then, the voice, closer now, almost as if he were standing right beside her. "You know who I am, Evan," he said, his voice a low, melodic rumble. "Your grandmother knew. And you carry her blood, her legacy. You carry my mark." Evan clutched the book tighter, her fingers tracing the embossed symbol on its cover. "The moonbound curse," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "What is it?" A low chuckle echoed from the other side of the door. "It's a bond, Evan, a connection that spans generations. A love that defies time and death. And you are the key to breaking it. Or to fulfilling it." "I don't want any part of this," Evan said, her voice rising in desperation. "I just want to be left alone." "It's too late for that," Caspian said, his voice laced with a hint of sadness. "The moon has chosen you. The mark has claimed you. And I am bound to you, just as you are bound to me." The scratching started again, this time more forceful, more desperate. The door began to splinter, cracks appearing around the hinges. Evan knew she had only seconds left. She made a decision. She couldn't fight him, not yet. But she could buy herself some time. She needed to understand what was happening, to find a way to break this curse, to free herself from this terrifying bond. She took a deep breath and moved towards the attic stairs, the shotgun held firmly in her hands. "I'll open the door," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But you have to promise me you won't hurt me." A moment of silence. Then a soft, almost hesitant reply. "I promise, Evan, I won't hurt you. I would never hurt you." With trembling hands, she descended the stairs, the book tucked safely inside her jacket. As she reached the bottom, she could see the outline of the door, the cracks widening, splinters of wood scattered on the floor. She took another deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. She reached for the bolt, her fingers fumbling with the cold metal. She slid it back, the sound echoing in the silence. She pulled the door open, slowly, hesitantly. Standing there, bathed in the silvery moonlight, was a man. He was tall and powerfully built, his shoulders broad, his presence filling the doorway. His hair was dark and wavy, falling to his shoulders, framing a face that was both strikingly handsome and deeply unsettling. His skin was pale, almost translucent, contrasting sharply with the darkness of his clothes. And his eyes were the color of molten gold, glowing with an intensity that made Avant's breath catch in her throat. They were the eyes from the locket, the eyes from her dreams, the eyes of Caspian. He looked at her, a mixture of longing and something wilder, something dangerous, swirling in their depths. Then, softly, almost a caress, he spoke a single word. Eventha. Chapter 5. The Unveiling of the Pack. The air crackled with an energy that Eventha could almost taste, a mixture of fear and a strange, undeniable pull. Caspian stood before her, a figure ripped from the pages of a gothic romance novel, yet undeniably, terrifyingly real. The moonlight illuminated the sharp angles of his face, the subtle curve of his lips, the intensity of his golden eyes. He was even more striking in person than in the faded portrait she'd found in the locket. You're him, she stammered, the shotgun trembling in her grip. Caspian inclined his head slightly, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Indeed, I am. Caspian Thorne, at your service or perhaps at your mercy. The words were spoken lightly, but Eventha sensed an underlying tension, a wariness in his posture, in the way his eyes constantly scanned the surrounding darkness. He was powerful, she could feel it, but he was also vulnerable. What do you want? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, to project an air of confidence she didn't feel. Caspian took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. The scent of him, wild and earthy, like pine needles and damp soil, filled her senses. I want to understand, he said, his voice low and husky. I want to know why you're here, why you've returned to Stillwater Creek after all these years. This is my grandmother's house, Eventha said, her grip tightening on the shotgun. I inherited it. I have every right to be here. Caspian's eyes flickered to the shotgun, a flicker of amusement in their depths. That old thing? I doubt it would even scratch me, let alone stop me. He paused, his gaze softening. But I promised I wouldn't hurt you, and I always keep my promises. Eventha lowered the shotgun slightly, her suspicion warring with a strange, inexplicable trust. What is this curse? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The moonbound curse? Caspian's expression darkened, a shadow passing over his face. It's a long story, Eventha. A story of love, betrayal, and ancient magic. A story that has been passed down through generations of my family, the Thorns, and yours, the Corbins. He gestured towards the woods surrounding the cottage. We can't talk here. It's not safe. Safe? Eventha scoffed. You're the one who is scratching at my door, growling like a wild animal. Caspian's lips twitched. I apologize for the theatrics. I needed to get your attention. And I needed to see the mark, to confirm that you were the one. The one? Eventha asked, her confusion growing. The one for what? The one who can break the curse, Caspian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or the one who can fulfill it. He extended a hand towards her, his palm open in a gesture of invitation. Come with me, Eventha. Let me show you. Let me explain. Eventha hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to lock herself back inside the cottage and pray that he would disappear with the dawn. But something held her back, a curiosity, a sense of inevitability, a pull towards this man, this creature, that she couldn't explain. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the long, elegant fingers, the faint glimmer of moonlight on his skin. She thought of her grandmother's journals, of the forbidden love, the desperate longing, the tragic ending. She thought of the mark on her own hand, the silvery crescent moon that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, sending a jolt of electricity through her body. He pulled her gently, leading her out of the cottage and into the moonlit woods. As they walked, The trees seemed to close in around them, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy of shadows. The air grew cooler, the scent of pine and damp earth intensifying. Evan could hear the rustling of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the distant howl of a wolf. She glanced at Caspian, her heart pounding. What was that? Caspian smiled, a flash of white teeth in the darkness. Just the welcoming committee. As they rounded a bend in the path, Evan gasped. Standing before them, in a small clearing bathed in moonlight, were several figures. They were tall and powerfully built, their eyes glowing with the same golden light as Caspian's. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces partially obscured by shadows, but Evan could sense their power, their wildness, their otherness. Evan, Caspian said, his voice soft. Meet my pack. Chapter 6. Forbidden Lore and Ancient Texts. The sight of the pack, their eyes glowing with that unnatural golden light, sent a fresh wave of fear through Evan. They were undeniably other, their presence radiating a power that felt both ancient and dangerous. Yet, held within Caspian's warm, steady grip, she found a sliver of courage she didn't know she possessed. Caspian introduced them one by one, their names echoing the wildness of the surrounding forest. Rowan, with his sharp, hawkish features and a gaze that seemed to pierce through her lyra, a woman with a cascade of raven hair and an air of quiet intensity, and Finn, young and restless, his eyes flickering with barely contained energy. There were others, their forms shifting in the dappled moonlight, their names lost in the rustling of leaves. They're like you? Evan asked, her voice barely a whisper. Caspian nodded. We are all bound by the same moon, by the same ancient bloodline. We are the Thorn Pack, and we have guarded the secrets of Stillwater Creek for centuries. He led her to a large, flat rock in the center of the clearing, gesturing for her to sit. The pack members remained standing, forming a silent, watchful circle around them. The moonbound curse, Caspian began, his voice low and resonant, is a story that begins long ago with a love affair between a powerful witch, Seraphina Corbin, your ancestor, and a werewolf, Alaric Thorn, my ancestor. Evanth's eyes widened. Her grandmother's journals had hinted at a forbidden love, but they had never explicitly mentioned werewolves. The reality of it, the sheer impossibility, was almost overwhelming. Seraphina and Alaric fell deeply in love, Caspian continued, but their love was forbidden. Their families were enemies, their worlds incompatible. They met in secret, under the light of the full moon, their bond growing stronger with each passing night. He paused, his gaze drifting towards the moon, now high in the sky, bathing the clearing in its silvery light. But their secret was discovered. Seraphina's family, fearing the power of the werewolves, cast a curse upon Alaric and his descendants. A curse that bound them to the moon, to its cycles, to its power. A curse that could only be broken by a descendant of Seraphina, a woman with the mark of the moon. Evan touched the back of her hand, the silvery crescent moon now glowing faintly beneath her skin. And that's me? Caspian nodded. You are the one, Evan. You carry Seraphina's blood, her power. You are the only one who can break the curse that has plagued my family for generations. But how? Evan asked, her mind reeling. What am I supposed to do? Caspian gestured towards the book she still clutched in her hands. That book, the one you found in the attic, is Seraphina's grimoire. It contains the secrets of her magic, the spells she used, the rituals she performed. It also contains the key to breaking the curse. He reached out and took the book from her, his fingers brushing against hers, sending another jolt of electricity through her. He opened the book, its pages brittle and yellowed with age, revealing intricate drawings, strange symbols, and text written in a language Evan didn't recognize. This is Old Norse, Caspian explained, the language of Seraphina's ancestors. I can translate it for you. The grimoire speaks of a ritual, a ceremony that must be performed under the blood moon, the next full moon, which is only a few weeks away. He began to read, his voice a low, melodic hum, translating the ancient words into English. The ritual described was complex and dangerous, involving the use of specific herbs, crystals, and incantations. It required a sacrifice, a willingness to surrender to the power of the moon, to embrace the wildness within. Evan listened, her heart pounding, her mind struggling to grasp the enormity of what was being asked of her. She was being asked to perform a magical ritual, to break a centuries-old curse, to embrace a destiny she never knew existed. As Caspian continued to read, a sense of unease settled over her. The ritual, as described in the grimoire, didn't just speak of breaking the curse. It also spoke of bonding, a permanent, unbreakable bond between the descendant of Seraphina and the descendant of Alaric. A soul bond. She looked at Caspian, his face illuminated by the moonlight, his golden eyes fixed on the ancient text. The fear returned, stronger this time, mixed with a strange, undeniable attraction. Was this her fate? To be bound to this man, this creature, for eternity? A chilling wind picked up, and the final sentence of the translated passage echoed through the trees and buried itself in her heart. Only in death, or in love, can the moon's chains be broken. Chapter 7. The first touch, the first fear. The weight of Seraphina's words, translated by Caspian, hung heavy in the air. Only in death, or in love, can the moon's chains be broken. Evance's mind reeled. The choice, stark and terrifying, was laid out before her, a potentially fatal ritual, or a soul bond with a man she barely knew, a man who was, by all accounts, a creature of myth. Caspian closed the grimoire, his golden eyes meeting hers. He saw the fear, the confusion, the hesitation swirling within them. He reached out, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek, his touch hesitant, almost reverent. "I know this is a lot to take in, Evan," he said, his voice soft, his gaze unwavering. "I know it's terrifying, but I promise you, I won't let anything happen to you." His words, meant to be reassuring, only served to amplify her unease. His promise felt both comforting and possessive. The idea of being so completely under his protection, so reliant on his power, was both alluring and frightening. She pulled back slightly, breaking the almost contact. "You said a soul bond," she said, her voice trembling. "What does that even mean?" Caspian sighed, his hand dropping back to his side. "It means an unbreakable connection, a merging of souls, a bond that transcends time and space. It means we would be bound to each other, forever, in every way imaginable." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "It's not something to be taken lightly, Evan. It's a commitment, a sacrifice. But it's also a gift, a chance to experience a love that is deeper, more profound, than anything you can imagine." Evan looked at him, at the intensity of his gaze, the raw emotion in his eyes. She saw the longing, the hope, the desperation. But she also saw the wildness, the power, the otherness that set him apart from her, from everything she knew. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know if I can trust you." Caspian took a step closer, his presence enveloping her. "Trust is earned, Evan," he said, his voice low and husky. "And I intend to earn yours. But for now, trust the connection you feel, the pull of the moon, the mark on your hand. Trust the blood that binds us." He reached out again, and this time, she didn't pull away. He gently took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. The contact sent a shockwave through her, a jolt of energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. His skin was warm, his grip strong, yet gentle. She could feel the power emanating from him, the wildness that lurked beneath the surface. He turned her hand over, his thumb tracing the silvery crescent moon on her wrist. The mark pulsed beneath his touch, glowing brighter, warmer. "The moon chose you, Evan," he said, his voice a whisper against her skin. "Just as it chose me. We are connected, whether you like it or not." He raised her hand to his lips, his warm breath ghosting over her skin. He pressed a soft kiss to the mark, his lips lingering for a moment, sending shivers down her spine. The gesture was both intimate and possessive, a claim, a promise. Yvan's heart pounded in her chest, her senses overwhelmed. She was terrified, yes, but she was also intrigued. Drawn to this man, to this creature, to this destiny that seemed to be unfolding before her. She looked into his golden eyes, saw the vulnerability, the longing, the hope that mirrored her own. She saw the wolf, yes, but she also saw the man. A man burdened by a curse, yearning for freedom, reaching out for a connection that had been denied to him for centuries. The pack watched in silence, their golden eyes fixed on the two of them, their presence a constant reminder of the stakes, of the power that surrounded them. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, the scent of Caspian, the scent of the wild. The moon, high above, bathed them in its silvery light, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. The fear remained, but beneath it, a flicker of something else ignited a spark of curiosity, a hint of desire, a whisper of possibility. It was quickly drowned out by the pounding of her heart when Caspian released her hand and, tilting his head towards the moon, let out a long, mournful howl that was swiftly echoed by the others. Chapter 8. Running from Destiny's Shadow. The sound of the howling, raw and primal, shattered the fragile connection that had begun to form between Yvan and Caspian. It was a stark reminder of his true nature, of the wildness that lurked beneath his civilized veneer, of the pack that waited in the shadows. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the tentative tendrils of curiosity and desire. Yvan pulled away from him, her hand instinctively going to the shotgun she'd discarded earlier, a useless gesture against the supernatural force that stood before her. She needed to escape, to think, to process the impossible reality that had been thrust upon her. I need to go, she stammered, her voice trembling. I need time to think. Caspian's golden eyes, filled with a mixture of disappointment and understanding, watched her retreat. I understand, he said, his voice low and even. But you can't run from this, Yvan. You can't run from the moon, from your destiny, from me. His words, spoken softly, felt like a threat, a promise, a prophecy. She turned and fled, stumbling through the woods, the branches whipping at her face, the undergrowth snagging at her clothes. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to put as much distance as possible between herself and Caspian, between herself and the terrifying truth of Stillwater Creek. She ran until she could run no more, her lungs burning, her legs aching. She collapsed at the base of a large oak tree, her back against its rough bark, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The moon, high above, seemed to mock her, its silvery light illuminating her fear, her vulnerability. She looked down at her hand, at the silvery crescent moon that still pulsed faintly beneath her skin. The mark, the curse, the bond, it was all real. She was connected to Caspian, to the pack, to this ancient magic, whether she wanted to be or not. She thought of her grandmother, Alara, of her forbidden love, her tragic ending. Was she destined to repeat her grandmother's mistakes? To fall for a man, a creature, who was both captivating and dangerous? To be consumed by a love that was doomed from the start? No. She wouldn't let that happen. She was stronger than Alara. She was a modern woman, independent, self-sufficient. She wouldn't be a victim of fate, a pawn in some ancient game. She would find a way to break this curse, to free herself from this terrifying bond, on her own terms. But how? She had the grimoire, Seraphina's book of spells, but she couldn't read the ancient language. Caspian had offered to translate it for her. But could she trust him? Could she trust anything he said? She thought of the ritual, the ceremony that was supposed to take place under the blood moon. It was dangerous, potentially fatal. But it was also her only chance, her only hope of escaping this nightmare. She needed help. She couldn't do this alone. She needed someone she could trust, someone who wouldn't dismiss her as crazy, someone who could help her understand this magic, this curse. She thought of the old woman she'd met by the creek, the one who had warned her about the Corbin's connection to Stillwater, to its curse. The woman had seemed to know something, to understand the secrets of this place. Perhaps she could help. Evan arose to her feet, her legs still shaky, her body exhausted. She had a plan, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. She would find the old woman, seek her guidance, learn what she could about the curse, about Seraphina's magic. She would arm herself with knowledge, with power, and she would face her destiny, whatever it may be. As she started to walk, heading back towards the town, back towards the cottage, back towards the unknown, a shadow moved in the periphery of her vision. She turned, her heart pounding, expecting to see Caspian, or one of his pack. But it wasn't them. It was something else, something darker, something even more terrifying. A pair of eyes, not golden, but red, glowing with an unnatural, malevolent light, watched her from the depths of the forest. A low growl, deeper and more menacing than any she'd heard before, rumbled through the trees. This time, it carried no hint of sadness, longing, or restraint. Only hunger. Chapter 9. The Cottage by the Whispering Pines. The red eyes vanished as quickly as they'd appeared, leaving Evan the trembling in the sudden silence. The growl, however, echoed in her mind, a chilling reminder that Caspian and his pack weren't the only supernatural threat lurking in the shadows of Stillwater Creek. She hurried back towards the town, her senses on high alert, every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sending shivers down her spine. The moon, still high in the sky, offered little comfort, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and shift with a life of their own. She reached the outskirts of the town, the familiar sight of the quaint, ramshackle buildings offering a small measure of reassurance. Stillwater Creek was a small, isolated community, nestled deep within the Appalachian Mountains, a place where time seemed to move slower, where ancient traditions and forgotten beliefs still held sway. She remembered the old woman she'd met by the creek, the one who had warned her about the curse. She hadn't gotten her name, but she remembered the general direction of her cottage, a small, secluded dwelling on the edge of town, surrounded by towering pine trees. Evan followed the winding, dirt road, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. The air was heavy with a scent of pine and damp earth, a scent that usually calmed her, but tonight, it only served to amplify her unease. She finally spotted the cottage, its windows dark, its silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of the towering pines. A thin plume of smoke curled from the chimney, a sign that someone was home. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding, her mind filled with doubt. Was she making a mistake? Was she walking into another trap? But she had nowhere else to turn, no one else to trust. She took a deep breath and approached the cottage, her hand instinctively going to the pocket where she'd tucked the silver ring, the one she'd found in her grandmother's drawer. The ring felt cold against her skin, a tangible link to the past, to the curse, to Caspian. She knocked on the door, her knuckles rapping softly against the weathered wood. A moment of silence stretched, then she heard the sound of footsteps inside, slow and deliberate. The door creaked open, revealing the old woman, her face etched with deep lines, her eyes, the color of faded denim, fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. She wore the same simple, homespun dress, a shawl draped around her shoulders, her silver hair braided down her back. "You came back," the woman said, her voice raspy, but not unkind. "I knew you would. You know about the curse," Evan said, her voice trembling. "About the Corbins and the Thorns." The woman nodded slowly. "I know more than most. My name is Agnes. And I've been waiting for you, Evan the Corbin." She stepped aside, inviting Evan into the cottage. The interior was small and cozy, lit by the warm glow of a fireplace, the air filled with the scent of herbs and wood smoke. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, jars of dried plants, and strange, unidentifiable objects. "Sit," Agnes said, gesturing towards a worn armchair by the fire. "We have much to discuss." Evan sat down, her body tense, her mind racing. She looked at Agnes, at her weathered face, her knowing eyes, and felt a flicker of hope, a sense that she might finally find some answers, some guidance, in this terrifying, bewildering situation. You said you've been waiting for me, Evan said, her voice barely above a whisper.
Why?
Agnes settled into a rocking chair opposite her, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. Because the blood moon is coming, child. And with it, the culmination of a centuries-old curse. And you, Evan the Corbin, are at the center of it all. She paused, a flicker of something that could have been sympathy in her gaze, before she spoke again. And those red eyes you saw in the woods. They belong to something far older and far more dangerous than Caspian Thorn and his pack. They belong to something that hungers for the moonbound. Chapter 10. The Hunter's Moon Rises. Agnes's words sent a chill deeper than the mountain air could ever conjure. Red eyes, hungering for the moonbound. The threat was no longer just a charming, albeit dangerous, werewolf and his pack. It was something older, something more primal, something that lurked in the deepest shadows of Stillwater Creek. What are they? Evan asked, her voice barely a whisper, clutching the arms of the chair. Agnes leaned forward, her faded denim eyes piercing. They are the shadow beasts, creatures of darkness, drawn to power, to magic, to the essence of the moonbound. They've been dormant for decades, their presence a mere whisper in the oldest tales of Stillwater. But the rising of the blood moon, the awakening of the curse it stirred them. They sense your power, Evan, the power of Seraphina Corbin flowing in your veins. She gestured towards a large, leather-bound book on a nearby table. This is the Liber Umbri, the Book of Shadows. It contains the history of Stillwater Creek, the stories of the Corbins and the Thorns, the truth about the shadow beasts. Evan looked at the book, its cover worn and cracked, its pages filled with strange symbols and ancient text. It felt heavy, imbued with a power that made her skin tingle. Can you read it? Evan asked, her gaze shifting back to Agnes. Agnes nodded. I can. I've spent my life studying the old ways, the forgotten lore of this place. I know the language of the ancients, the secrets of the shadow beasts, the truth about the moonbound curse. She opened the book, her fingers tracing the faded ink, her voice a low, rhythmic hum as she began to translate. The Liber Umbri told a story even more complex and terrifying than the one Caspian had shared. It spoke of a time before the Corbins and the Thorns, a time when the shadow beasts ruled Stillwater Creek, feeding on the fear and the magic of the land. Seraphina Corbin, Agnes explained, was not just a witch. She was a protector, a guardian of Stillwater. She fought against the shadow beasts, driving them back into the darkness, sealing them away with a powerful spell, a spell that was tied to the moon, to its cycles, to her own bloodline. The spell, however, was not perfect. It required a constant source of power, a sacrifice, to keep the shadow beasts contained. That sacrifice was the moonbound curse, the bond between the Corbins and the Thorns, the constant tension, the forbidden love, the tragic endings. The curse, Agnes said, was not just a punishment. It was a safeguard. The power of the bond, the love and the loss, it fed the spell, kept the shadow beasts at bay. But the spell is weakening. The blood moon, the culmination of the lunar cycle, is a time of great power, a time when the veil between worlds is thin. It's also a time when the shadow beasts are at their strongest. The blood moon. Evana remembered Caspian's words, his urgency, his insistence that she perform the ritual. He hadn't told her the whole truth. He hadn't told her about the shadow beasts, about the true purpose of the curse. Caspian, he wants me to break the curse, Evana said, her voice filled with doubt. But what if breaking the curse unleashes the shadow beasts? Agnes looked at her, her expression grave. That is a possibility, child. A very real possibility. Caspian may be telling you part of the truth, to fulfill his own freedom, but he is not the only one who has a right over what to do. She paused, her gaze searching a Vance, or a reason to lie. The ritual, Evana continued, the one in Seraphina's grimoire, it speaks of a bond, a soul bond with Caspian. Is that necessary to break the curse? Agnes hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting towards the fireplace, the flames dancing and casting flickering shadows on the walls. Not necessarily, she finally said, her voice low. There is another way. A more dangerous way, a way that requires immense power, immense sacrifice. A way that Seraphina herself used to seal the shadow beasts away. What is it? Evan, they asked, her heart pounding. Tell me. Agnes looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and determination. It requires the power of the blood moon, harnessed and channeled through a descendant of Seraphina, a woman with the mark of the moon. It requires a willingness to surrender, not to Caspian, but to the moon itself. To become its vessel, its instrument, its weapon. She paused, her gaze unwavering. It's a path of great power, Evan, but it's also a path of great risk. It could consume you, destroy you, or it could save you, save Stillwater Creek, save everyone. As if summoned by their conversation, the moon outside, previously a pale silver, began to shift, taking on a reddish hue. The hunter's moon, the precursor to the blood moon, was rising. Evan looked at it, fear and determination warring within her. The choice was hers, and the time to choose was running out. Chapter 11. Trapped between two worlds. The reddish glow of the hunter's moon seeped through the windows of Agnes's cottage, casting an eerie, unsettling light on the room. Evan felt trapped, caught between the terrifying prospect of the shadow beasts, the seductive pull of Caspian and the soul bond, and the daunting, potentially fatal path Agnes had revealed. Become the moon's vessel, she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. What does that even mean? Agnes rose from her rocking chair, her movements slow but deliberate. She walked towards a small, wooden cabinet in the corner of the room, its doors intricately carved with images of wolves, moons, and intertwined serpents. It means embracing your heritage, Evan, she said, her voice low and resonant. Embracing the power of Seraphina Corbin, the power that flows in your veins. It means becoming a conduit for the moon's energy, channeling its raw, untamed force to banish the shadow beasts. She opened the cabinet, revealing a collection of objects, a silver dagger, its blade etched with ancient runes, a crystal sphere, pulsing with a faint, internal light, a necklace made of woven wolf hair and moonstones, and a small, leather-bound book, different from Seraphina's grimoire, this one filled with Agnes's own meticulous handwriting. This is my own journal, Agnes explained, a record of my research, my understanding of Seraphina's magic, my preparations for this very moment. She handed Evan the book. It contains a ritual, a different ritual than the one in Seraphina's grimoire. A ritual that will allow you to harness the power of the blood moon, to become the moon's weapon, without binding yourself to Caspian. Evan took the book, her hands trembling. She opened it, her eyes scanning the pages, the intricate diagrams, the carefully written instructions. The ritual was complex, demanding, and terrifying. It required a level of control, a level of power that she wasn't sure she possessed. This is dangerous, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You said it yourself. It could consume me. Agnes nodded, her expression grave. It is. But it's also your best chance, perhaps your only chance, to save yourself and Stillwater Creek from both the shadow beasts and a forced bond with Caspian. He seeks to control you, Evan, to use your power for his own purposes. He may speak of love, of destiny, but his true desire is freedom, freedom from the curse, regardless of the cost. Evan thought of Caspian, of his golden eyes, his seductive voice, his promises. She had felt a connection to him, a pull that she couldn't deny. But she had also sensed his underlying agenda, his desperation, his willingness to do whatever it took to break the curse, even if it meant manipulating her. I don't want to be controlled, she said, her voice gaining strength. I don't want to be anyone's pawn. Not Caspian's, not the moon's, not anyone's. Agnes smiled, a flicker of pride in her faded denim eyes. Then you must choose your own path, Evan. You must embrace your power, your heritage, your destiny. You must become the weapon. As if in response to her words, a loud pounding echoed from the front door, shaking the cottage to its foundations. Evan jumped, her heart pounding, her gaze darting towards the entrance. "They're here," Agnes said, her voice calm, but urgent. "The shadow beasts. They sense your power, your decision. They're coming for you." The pounding intensified, the door creaking and groaning under the pressure. Evan knew she had only moments left to make a choice. To run, to hide, to surrender to Caspian, or to embrace the dangerous, uncertain path that lay before her. She looked at Agnes, at her unwavering gaze, her quiet strength. She looked at the book in her hands, at the ritual that offered both immense power and immense risk. She looked at the door, at the terrifying presence that lurked on the other side. She took a deep breath, her fear battling with a newfound determination. She would not be a victim. She would not be controlled. She would fight. She would choose her own destiny. "Teach me," she said, her voice firm, her eyes blazing with a newfound fire. "Teach me the ritual. Teach me to become the moon's weapon." Before Agnes could reply, however, the door burst open, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Framed in the destroyed doorway stood not a shadowy beast, but Caspian, his golden eyes blazing with fury, 2 members of his pack flanking him, their teeth bared in menacing snarls. "You will not touch her," he roared. Chapter 12. Unmasking the Past, Unveiling Secrets. The air crackled with tension, the scent of pine and wood smoke now mixed with the raw, animalistic scent of Caspian and his pack. He stood in the shattered doorway, a figure of barely controlled fury, his golden eyes fixed on Agnes, then shifting to Evan, a mixture of betrayal and desperation swirling within them. "Evan," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "What have you done? What has she told you?" Evan stood her ground, clutching Agnes's journal to her chest, a newfound strength coursing through her veins. "She's told me the truth," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The truth about the shadow beasts, about the real purpose of the curse, about your manipulation." Caspian's expression hardened. "Manipulation? I offered you a way out, a chance to break free from this curse, to experience a love that transcends time itself. A love that binds me to you forever," Evan retorted. "A love that serves your purposes, not mine. A love that keeps the shadow beasts contained, but at what cost?" Caspian took a step forward, his pack members flanking him, their growls rumbling low in their chests. "The shadow beasts are a myth, a story to frighten children. They haven't been a threat for centuries." Agnes stepped forward, her frail figure radiating a surprising amount of power. "Don't lie, Caspian Thorn. You know the truth. You feel them stirring just as I do. The blood moon is awakening them, and Evan is the key to their destruction, or their freedom." Caspian turned his gaze to Agnes, his eyes narrowed. "You old fool. You're filling her head with nonsense, with dangerous ideas. She's not strong enough to control the moon's power. She'll be consumed by it." "She's stronger than you think," Agnes retorted. "She has the blood of Seraphina Corbin flowing in her veins, the power of a protector, a guardian. She can choose her own path, her own destiny. She doesn't need you." Caspian turned back to Evan, his expression softening, his voice pleading. "Evan, please. Don't listen to her. Come with me. We can break the curse together, the way it was meant to be. We can be free." Evan hesitated, her heart torn. She felt the pull towards Caspian, the undeniable connection that had been forged between them. But she also saw the desperation in his eyes, the underlying agenda, the willingness to sacrifice her for his own freedom. She looked at Agnes, at her unwavering gaze, her quiet strength. She looked at the journal in her hands, at the ritual that offered a different path, a path of immense power and immense risk, but a path that was her own. "I need to know the whole truth," Evan said, her voice firm. "The truth about my grandmother, Alara. The truth about her relationship with your ancestor. The truth about everything." Caspian and Agnes exchanged a look, a silent battle of wills. Finally, Caspian sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Very well," he said, his voice resigned. "You deserve to know." He gestured towards the chairs, and they all sat down, forming a tense circle around the flickering fireplace. Caspian began to speak, his voice low and filled with a mixture of regret and longing. He told Evan the story of Alara and Alaric, a love story even more tragic and complex than the one she'd read in her grandmother's journals. Alaric, he revealed, had not been a willing participant in the curse. He had loved Seraphina deeply, but he had also been bound by duty to his pack, to his family. He had tried to break the curse, to find a way to be with Seraphina without endangering his people. But Seraphina, driven by fear and desperation, had refused to listen. She had performed the ritual, binding Alaric and his descendants to the moon, to her bloodline, ensuring the protection of Stillwater Creek, but also condemning them to a life of torment. Alara, Evance's grandmother, had discovered the truth. She had learned about the shadow beasts, about the real purpose of the curse, about Alaric's sacrifice. She had tried to find a way to break the curse, to free Alaric's descendants, but she had failed. She had fled Stillwater Creek, fearing for her life, fearing the power of the moon, fearing the wrath of the thorns. My father, Caspian continued, spent his life searching for a way to break the curse. He found Seraphina's grimoire, learned about the ritual, the soul bond. He believed it was the only way. He was obsessed with it. He paused, his gaze meeting Evance. I don't want to be like him. I don't want to force you into anything. But I also know the danger we're facing. The shadow beasts are real, and they're growing stronger. We need to do something. He looked at Agnes, his expression a mixture of anger and grudging respect. But I won't let you risk her life with your alternative. It's too dangerous. Agnes stood firm. It's her choice, Caspian. Not yours. Not mine. She has the power. She has the right to decide. Evan looked from Caspian to Agnes, her mind reeling. The truth, finally revealed, was both liberating and terrifying. She understood the stakes, the dangers, the choices that lay before her. The past was no longer a story, a myth. It was a living, breathing reality, shaping her present, determining her future. She saw, for the first time, the true reflection of her grandmother in the depths of Caspian's eyes, and realized he was telling the truth. But so was Agnes. She rose and backed away from them both, overwhelmed. I need
air, time.
She fled out the shattered remains of the door, and into the night. Chapter 13. The Price of a Soul Bond. The cold night air hit Evance's face like a slap, a welcome contrast to the stifling tension inside Agnes's cottage. The hunter's moon, now fully tinged with red, cast an eerie glow over Stillwater Creek, illuminating the towering pines, the winding dirt road, the dark, ominous shadows that seemed to writhe and shift with a life of their own. She walked, her pace quickening, her mind racing. She needed to escape, to think, to process the overwhelming revelations of the past hour. Caspian's story, Agnes's warnings, the looming threat of the shadow beasts, the two paths that lay before her, the soul bond, or the dangerous, uncertain ritual. She found herself drawn to the creek, the place where she'd first encountered Agnes, the place where her journey into this supernatural world had begun. The water flowed clear and cold, reflecting the reddish moonlight like a ribbon of liquid blood. She sat on a smooth, moss-covered rock, her hands clutching Agnes's journal, her gaze fixed on the swirling water. She thought of Caspian, of his golden eyes, his conflicted heart, his desperate desire for freedom. She understood his motivations, his fears, his longing. But she also saw the potential for control, for manipulation, for a love that could become a prison. She thought of Agnes, of her unwavering strength, her quiet wisdom, her belief in Evance's power. She trusted Agnes. She believed in her guidance, but she also feared the path she offered, the path of immense risk, of potential self-destruction. She opened the journal, her fingers tracing the intricate diagrams, the carefully written instructions for the alternative ritual. It was a complex and demanding undertaking, requiring a level of control, a level of power that she wasn't sure she possessed. It required her to surrender to the moon, to become its vessel, its weapon, to channel its raw, untamed force. But what if she failed? What if the power consumed her, destroyed her? What if she unleashed the shadow beasts, plunging Stillwater Creek into darkness? She closed the journal, her heart pounding, her mind filled with doubt. She wasn't strong enough. She wasn't a witch, a protector, a guardian. She was just Evan the Corbin, a widow, a woman who had sought solace in a quiet town, only to find herself caught in a supernatural nightmare. A sudden noise startled her, a rustling in the undergrowth, the snap of a twig. She turned, her hand instinctively going to her pocket, clutching the silver ring, the one that had belonged to Alara. Caspian emerged from the shadows, his golden eyes glowing in the moonlight, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "I followed you," he said, his voice low and even. "I had to make sure you were safe." Evan didn't reply, her gaze fixed on the creek, her body tense, her mind still reeling. Caspian sat down beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth emanating from his body, smell the wild, earthy scent of him. "I know you're scared," he said, his voice soft, his gaze unwavering. "I know you're confused. But you don't have to do this alone. We can face this together." He reached out, his hand hovering over hers, his touch hesitant, almost reverent. "The soul bond, it's not just about breaking the curse, Evan. It's about connection. It's about finding your other half, your soulmate, the one person who truly understands you, who completes you." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "I know I haven't been completely honest with you. I was driven by desperation, by fear, by the centuries of torment that my family has endured. But I care about you, Evan, more than I ever thought possible." His words, spoken with such sincerity, such vulnerability, touched her heart. She felt the pull towards him, the undeniable connection that had been forged between them, the spark of desire that had flickered beneath the surface of her fear. "But what if it's not love, Caspian?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "What if it's just the curse? The magic? The moon?" Caspian took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. His touch sent a shockwave through her, a jolt of energy that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Maybe it's both," he said, his voice a whisper against her skin. "Maybe the curse is also a gift, a chance to find a love that is deeper, more profound than anything you can imagine. A love that transcends time and death." He raised her hand to his lips, his warm breath ghosting over her skin. He pressed a soft kiss to the silvery crescent moon on her wrist, the mark pulsing beneath his touch. "But it's your choice, Evan," he said, his gaze locking with hers. "I won't force you. I won't manipulate you. I'll respect your decision, whatever it may be." He paused and released her hand. "But know this, the price of a soul bond is the loss of your former self. You would be mine and I would be yours. Utterly. Completely. For all time. Think carefully, Evan." He stood and began to walk away, but stopped after a few paces, his back to her. "The blood moon rises tomorrow night. You have until then to decide." Chapter 14. Broken Trust, Shattered Illusions. Caspian's words echoed in Avant's mind, a stark reminder of the monumental decision she faced. Utterly. Completely. For all time. The weight of those words, the permanence of the soul bond, pressed down on her, suffocating her. She watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing into the shadows, leaving her alone with her thoughts, her fears, her doubts. The hunter's moon, now a deep, ominous red, cast an eerie glow over the creek, reflecting in the swirling water like a pool of blood. She looked down at her hand, at the silvery crescent moon that pulsed beneath her skin. The mark, the curse, the bond, it was all a part of her now, woven into the fabric of her being. She could feel the moon's power, its pull, its call. She thought of Agnes, of the alternative ritual, the dangerous path that offered freedom, but at a potentially devastating cost. She thought of the shadow beasts, of their hunger, their malevolence, their threat to Stillwater Creek. She needed to understand, to be sure, to make the right decision, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. She couldn't rely on Caspian, not completely. His honesty, his vulnerability, had touched her, but she still sensed a hidden agenda, a desperation that could cloud his judgment. She decided to return to Agnes, to seek her guidance, her wisdom, one last time. She needed to know more about the alternative ritual, about the risks, about the potential consequences. She needed to know if she truly had the strength, the power, to harness the moon's energy, to become its weapon. She walked back to the cottage, her footsteps heavy, her mind troubled. The door, still shattered from Caspian's earlier entrance, offered no resistance. She stepped inside, the scent of herbs and wood smoke welcoming her, a familiar comfort in this unsettling night. Agnes was sitting by the fireplace, her gaze fixed on the flames, her expression unreadable. She looked up as Evan entered, a flicker of concern in her faded denim eyes. "You're back," she said, her voice soft. "What did he say?" Evan sat down opposite her, her body tense, her hands clutching Agnes's journal. "He told me about the soul bond," she said, her voice trembling. "About the price. About losing myself." Agnes nodded slowly. "It is a heavy price, child. A price that many are not willing to pay. But it is also a powerful bond, a connection that can bring great strength, great love." "But what if it's not love, Agnes?" Evan asked, her voice rising in desperation. "What if it's just the curse? The magic? The moon controlling us?" Agnes sighed, her gaze shifting to the journal in Evan's hands. "That is the question, isn't it? The question that every moonbound woman must ask herself. The question that Serafina herself struggled with." She reached out and took the journal from Evan, her fingers tracing the faded ink, the intricate diagrams. "This ritual," she said, her voice low and resonant. "It's not a simple spell, Evan. It's a transformation. It's a merging with the moon's energy, becoming a vessel for its power. It's a dangerous path, yes, but it's also a path of freedom, of self-determination." She paused, her gaze meeting Evan's. "But it requires sacrifice, Evan. Not just the sacrifice of your former self, but the sacrifice of something else. Something precious. Something you hold dear." Evan's heart pounded in her chest. "What do you mean?" Agnes hesitated for a moment, her gaze drifting towards the window, towards the blood-red moon that hung low in the sky. "The ritual requires a catalyst," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something to ignite the moon's power, to channel its energy, to bind it to you. Something of great magical significance." She looked back at Evan, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. "It requires the silver ring, Evan, the one you inherited from Alara. The one that bears the mark of the moon and the wolf." Evan's hand instinctively went to her pocket, clutching the ring, the cold metal pressing against her skin. The ring, it was more than just a trinket, a family heirloom. It was a link to her grandmother, to her past, to the magic that flowed in her veins. It was a symbol of her connection to Caspian, to the curse, to the moon. "The ring," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion.
"But why?"
Agnes explained that the ring was not just a symbol, but a conduit, a focus for Serafina's magic. It had been imbued with her power, her essence, her connection to the moon. It was the key to unlocking the full potential of the alternative ritual, the key to defeating the shadow beasts, the key to breaking the curse, without binding herself to Caspian. But to use the ring in the ritual, to channel its power, would mean destroying it, breaking the connection, severing the link, sacrificing a piece of her heritage, a piece of herself. The revelation hit Evan like a physical blow. She had been so focused on the choice between the soul bond and the alternative ritual that she hadn't considered the price of either path. Both required sacrifice, both demanded a loss, both threatened to change her forever. She looked at Agnes, at her weathered face, her knowing eyes, and felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was trapped, caught between two impossible choices, two devastating sacrifices. The trust she thought she was building was falling around her. Everyone had a secret. Everyone had an agenda. And the blood moon was rising. Just as she was about to speak, there was a commotion out east.
Shouts. Growls.
And a scream that Evan recognized. It was Rowan, one of Caspian's pack. Chapter 15. The Gathering Storm of Revelation. The scream, raw and filled with pain, shattered the tense silence of Agnes's cottage. Evan and Agnes exchanged a look of alarm, their bodies tensing, their senses on high alert. The threat of the shadow beasts, previously a theoretical danger, had suddenly become terrifyingly real. They rushed to the shattered remains of the door, peering out into the blood-red moonlight. The scene that greeted them was one of chaos and violence. Rowan, Caspian's hawk-faced pack member, was lying on the ground, his body writhing in agony, his clothes torn, his skin covered in deep, bleeding gashes. Standing over him were two figures, their forms shrouded in shadow, their eyes glowing with an unnatural, malevolent red light. The shadow beasts. They were even more terrifying in person than in Agnes's descriptions or the ancient texts. Tall and gaunt, their limbs unnaturally long and thin, their flesh a sickly pale color, their faces contorted into grotesque masks of hunger and rage. They radiated an aura of darkness, of pure, unadulterated evil. Before Evan or Agnes could react, another figure burst onto the scene. Caspian, his golden eyes blazing with fury, his body transformed, partially shifted into his wolf form, his teeth bared in a savage snarl. He lunged at the shadow beasts, his claws extended, his movements a blur of speed and power. The battle was swift and brutal. Caspian fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal, his claws and teeth tearing at the shadow beasts, drawing dark, viscous blood. But they were relentless, their claws sharp as razors, their strength seemingly inexhaustible. Lyra and Finn, the other two members of Caspian's pack who had been with him earlier, joined the fray, their own forms shifting, their growls echoing through the night. But even with their combined strength, they were outnumbered and outmatched. Evan watched in horror, her body frozen, her mind reeling. She wanted to help, to do something, anything, but she felt powerless, paralyzed by fear. Agnes, however, was not idle. She rushed back inside the cottage, grabbing the silver dagger from the cabinet, its blade etched with ancient runes. She muttered an incantation under her breath, her voice low and urgent, her eyes glowing with a faint, ethereal light. "Evan," she called out, her voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. "The ritual.
Now.
We have to do it now." Evan snapped out of her stupor, her mind racing. She had made her decision, hadn't she? She had chosen to embrace her power, to become the moon's weapon, to fight for her freedom, for the safety of Stillwater Creek. But the ring sacrificed the thought of destroying it, of severing the connection to her grandmother, to her past, to Caspian, still filled her with doubt, with fear. Agnes thrust the dagger into her hands. "There's no time, child. The blood moon is at its zenith. We have to act now, or all will be lost." Evan looked at the dagger, at its gleaming blade, at the ancient runes that seemed to pulse with power. She looked at Agnes, at her determined gaze, her unwavering belief in Avant's strength. She looked at the battle raging outside, at Caspian and his pack, fighting desperately against the overwhelming darkness. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, pushing aside her doubts, her fears. She had made her choice. She would fight. She would sacrifice. She would become the weapon. She clutched the dagger tightly, her fingers tracing the runes, feeling the power thrumming beneath her skin. She closed her eyes, focusing on the moon, on its energy, on its call. She began to chant, her voice low at first, then rising in strength and intensity, reciting the words from Agnes's journal, the ancient incantations, the forgotten language of Serafina Corbin. As she chanted, she felt a surge of power, a wave of energy flowing through her body, coursing through her veins, filling her with a strength she never knew she possessed. The air around her crackled, the temperature dropped, the scent of ozone filled her nostrils. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the blood-red moon, now directly overhead, bathing Stillwater Creek in its eerie, unsettling light. She could feel the moon's power, its presence, its essence, merging with her own, transforming her, changing her. But as the power reached its peak, as she felt herself on the verge of becoming something more, something other, a wave of doubt, of fear, washed over her. She saw Caspian, his body battered and bleeding, fighting with a desperate courage, his eyes filled with a mixture of fury and love. She hesitated, her chant faltering, her focus wavering. Could she do this? Could she destroy the ring, sever the connection, potentially condemn Caspian, the pack, to a fate worse than death? Could she embrace this power, this destiny, without losing herself completely? A voice, slick and cold and ancient, whispered inside of her head. You do not need to sacrifice anything. Join with them. Join with us. The distraction broke her concentration. The shadow beasts, sensing her wavering power, turned their attention to her. One lunged, red eyes blazing. Chapter 16. A dance with darkness and desire. The shadow beast lunged, its claws extended, its red eyes burning with malevolent intent. Eventha, her concentration broken, her chant faltering, stumbled backward, her heart pounding in her chest. The power that had been surging through her moments before now felt unstable, chaotic, threatening to consume her. Before the creature could reach her, a figure intervened, a blur of motion and fury. Caspian, his body partially shifted, his golden eyes blazing, slammed into the shadow beast, knocking it back with a savage roar. He stood between Eventha and the creature, a shield of muscle and fur, his claws dripping with dark, viscous blood. He was wounded, his body covered in gashes, but his determination was unwavering. Run, Eventha, he shouted, his voice hoarse, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Get away from here. Eventha hesitated. She wanted to run, to escape the terrifying scene, the overwhelming power, the impossible choice. But she couldn't leave Caspian. Not like this, not facing the shadow beasts alone. She looked at Agnes, who was standing near the shattered doorway, her face pale but determined, her hands still clutching the silver dagger. The ritual. Agnes called out, her voice strained. You have to finish it. It's the only way. Eventha looked back at Caspian, at his battered body, his unwavering gaze, his desperate plea. She looked at the shadow beast, recovering from Caspian's attack, its red eyes fixed on her, its hunger palpable. She looked at the blood-red moon, hanging low in the sky, its power beckoning her, threatening her, challenging her. The voice was back, louder, inside her head. Join us, Eventha. We can give you power unimaginable. She made a decision. She wouldn't run. She wouldn't abandon Caspian. But she wouldn't abandon the alternative ritual either. She would find another way, a way to fight, a way to protect them both, a way to harness the moon's power without destroying the ring, without completely surrendering to its control. She dropped the silver dagger, her hand going to her pocket, clutching the ring, the cold metal pressing against her skin. She closed her eyes, focusing on the connection, on the link to her grandmother, to Alara, to Seraphina, to the moon itself. She began to chant, not the words from Agnes's journal, not the ancient incantations, but a new chant, a spontaneous creation, a blend of Seraphina's magic, Agnes's knowledge, and her own burgeoning power. She drew upon the energy of the blood moon, channeling it through the ring, not to destroy it, but to amplify its power, to transform it into a weapon, a shield, a conduit. As she chanted, the ring began to glow, its silvery light intensifying, pulsing with a raw, untamed energy. The air around her crackled, the temperature dropped, the scent of ozone filled her nostrils. She could feel the moon's power flowing through her, merging with her, not consuming her, but empowering her. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the shadow beast, her voice ringing out, clear and strong, filled with a newfound confidence, a newfound authority. I am Eventha Corbin, she declared, descendant of Seraphina Corbin, guardian of Stillwater Creek. And I will not let you harm this place, these people, or him. She raised her hand, the ring glowing brightly, and unleashed a wave of energy, a blast of pure lunar power, directed at the shadow beast. The creature shrieked, its shadowy form flickering, its red eyes dimming, as the energy struck it, pushing it back, weakening it, but not destroying it. Caspin, stunned by her display of power, watched her with a mixture of awe and fear. He had never seen anything like this raw, untamed force, this fusion of magic and will. The other shadow beast, seeing its companion weakened, lunged at Evan, its claws extended. But Caspian, recovering from his surprise, intercepted it, his own claws and teeth tearing at its flesh, drawing dark, viscous blood. Evan continued to chant, channeling the moon's power through the ring, creating a shield of energy around herself, around Caspian, around the wounded Rowan, around Agnes. She was dancing on the edge of control, teetering between power and destruction, between darkness and light. The voice whispered again, closer this time, more insistent. You cannot control it alone. Let us help you. She ignored it. She focused on the battle, on protecting Caspian, on driving back the shadow beasts, on buying them time, on finding a way to end this nightmare. She was no longer just Evan the Corbin, the widow, the outsider. She was something more, something powerful, something moonbound. But on her terms. She would fight, with the power of the ring, with the magic of her ancestors, with a fierce, protective love that was beginning to blossom in her heart, for this place, for these people, for Caspian. The thought surprised her. Where had that come from? There was no time to think. She had to act. She raised her hand again, and another wave of power crashed into the remaining shadow beast, as Caspian struggled against it. She was not sure what would happen, but she knew she could not fail. Chapter 17. The Blood Moon's Ultimatum. The blast of lunar energy, channeled through the ring, struck the second shadow beast with tremendous force. The creature shrieked, its shadowy form flickering, its red eyes dimming, as it stumbled backward, weakened but not destroyed. Caspian, taking advantage of the opening, lunged at the creature, his claws and teeth tearing at its flesh, driving it back towards the edge of the woods. Evan continued to chant, maintaining the shield of energy around them, protecting them from the remaining shadow beast, which was still struggling to recover from her initial attack. She could feel the moon's power coursing through her, a raw, untamed force that both exhilarated and terrified her. She was dancing on the edge of control, teetering between triumph and disaster. The voice, the insidious whisper that had plagued her throughout the ritual, returned, stronger now, more insistent, its tone laced with a mixture of temptation and menace. You cannot win, Evan. You are alone. You are weak. Join us. Embrace the darkness. Become one with the shadows. We can give you power beyond your wildest dreams. Evan gritted her teeth, her focus wavering, her chant faltering. The voice was seductive, alluring, promising an end to the struggle, an escape from the fear, the pain, the responsibility. It was tempting to surrender, to give in, to let the darkness consume her. But then she saw Caspian, his body battered and bleeding, fighting with a desperate courage, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of determination and trust. He was looking at her, relying on her, believing in her, even though he didn't fully understand what she was doing, even though he feared the power she was wielding. That look, that trust, that unspoken connection, gave her the strength to resist the voice, to push back against the darkness, to regain control of the ritual, of herself. No, she said, her voice firm, her gaze fixed on the blood-red moon, now directly overhead, bathing Stillwater Creek in its eerie, unsettling light. I will not join you. I will not surrender. I will fight. I will protect. I will choose. She renewed her chant, her voice rising in strength and intensity, drawing upon the moon's power, channeling it through the ring, focusing it on the remaining shadow beast. The creature, sensing her renewed determination, recoiled, its red eyes flickering with fear. Evan unleashed another blast of energy, even more powerful than the first, striking the shadow beast with the force of a hurricane. The creature shrieked, its shadowy form dissolving, its red eyes extinguished, its essence dissipating into the night. Silence descended upon Stillwater Creek, broken only by the ragged breathing of Caspian and his pack, the crackling of the dying embers in Agnes's fireplace, the soft whisper of the wind through the trees. Evan lowered her hand, the ring dimming, its energy receding. She felt drained, exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but also exhilarated. She had done it. She had harnessed the moon's power, defeated the shadow beasts, protected Caspian, protected Stillwater Creek. She looked at Caspian, who was staring at her with a mixture of awe, gratitude, and something else. Something that looked like love. You saved us, he said, his voice hoarse, his breath coming in ragged gasps. You saved me. Evan smiled, a weak, trembling smile, but a smile nonetheless. We saved each other, she said, her voice soft, her gaze meeting his. Before they could say anything more, Agnes spoke, her voice urgent, her gaze fixed on the moon. It's not over, Evan. The blood moon is still at its zenith. The ritual, it's not complete. Evan turned to Agnes, her heart sinking. She had hoped, desperately, that defeating the shadow beasts would be enough, that she could finally rest, that she could finally escape this nightmare. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. Agnes pointed towards the moon, its blood-red glow casting an ominous light over the scene. The spell, Seraphina's spell, it's still weakening. The shadow beasts were just a symptom, a manifestation of the deeper problem. The veil between worlds is still thin, the darkness is still pressing in. She paused, her gaze meeting Evan's. You've harnessed the moon's power, Evan, but you haven't sealed the breach. You haven't restored the balance. You haven't finished the ritual. Evan's mind reeled. What more could she do? She had given everything she had, pushed herself to the limit, risked her life, her sanity, her very soul.
But how?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What else can I do? Agnes looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and understanding. There's only one way, Evan. You must complete the connection. You must bind yourself to the moon, not as its weapon, but as its guardian. Bind myself? Evan repeated, her voice choked with emotion. But that's what you wanted me to avoid. That's what Caspian, it's different now. Agnes interrupted, her voice firm. You've proven your strength, your control, your will. You've chosen your own path. You've harnessed the moon's power on your own terms. You can bind yourself to it, not as a slave, but as a partner, a protector, a queen. She paused, her gaze unwavering. But it still requires a sacrifice, Evan. A final sacrifice. A sacrifice of choice. The moon seemed to pulse, and the seductive voice echoed once again, but outside of her this time, seeming to come from the very air around them. Join with us. Rule with us. Agnes ignored it, continuing to address Evan. You have to choose to bind yourself, Evan. Freely, willingly, without coercion, without manipulation. You have to choose to become the guardian of Stillwater Creek, the protector of the veil, the keeper of the balance. It's the only way to truly banish the darkness. It's the Blood Moon's ultimatum. Chapter 18. Sacrifice at the Altar of Fate. Agnes's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of destiny, of choice, of sacrifice. The guardian of Stillwater Creek, the protector of the veil, the keeper of the balance. The titles felt both immense and terrifying, a burden she wasn't sure she was ready to bear, a responsibility she hadn't asked for. Evan looked at the blood-red moon, hanging low in the sky, its power palpable, its presence overwhelming. She could feel its pull, its call, its invitation and its threat. The choice was hers, and hers alone. To bind herself to the moon, to become its guardian, to sacrifice her freedom, her former life, her choice. Or to refuse, to walk away, To risk the return of the shadow beasts, to risk the destruction of Stillwater Creek, to risk losing everything she had fought so hard to protect. She looked at Caspian, his golden eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear, his body still battered and bleeding, but his spirit unbroken. He had offered her a different path, a path of love, of connection, of a soul bond that would bind them together forever. But she knew now that it wasn't the right path for her, not anymore. She needed to be her own person, to make her own choices, to forge her own destiny. She looked at Agnes, her weathered face etched with concern, her faded denim eyes filled with a quiet understanding, a silent support. Agnes had guided her, warned her, empowered her, but she had also respected her choices, her autonomy, her right to choose her own path. She looked at Rowan and Finn, the two remaining members of Caspian's pack, their bodies still partially shifted, their eyes reflecting the eerie glow of the blood moon. They were loyal to Caspian, yes, but they also seemed to recognize her power, her strength, her right to choose. The voice, the insidious whisper that had plagued her throughout the ritual, returned, its tone now laced with desperation, with a hint of fear. Don't do it, Evan. Don't bind yourself. Join us. We can offer you so much more.
Power.
Freedom. Immortality. Evan ignored the voice, focusing on the decision before her, on the choice that would determine her fate, the fate of Stillwater Creek, the fate of everyone she had come to care about. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest, her mind racing, her soul searching. She thought of her grandmother, Alara, of her tragic love, her desperate flight, her fear of the moon, of the curse. She thought of Seraphina Corbin, the powerful witch, the protector, the guardian, who had sacrificed everything to save Stillwater Creek from the shadow beasts. She thought of Caspian, of his golden eyes, his conflicted heart, his unwavering courage, his love for her, a love that she now recognized, a love that she reciprocated. But it was a love that could not be bound by a curse, by a forced connection, by a sacrifice of choice. She thought of herself, of Evan the Corbin, the widow, the outsider, the woman who had come to Stillwater Creek seeking solace, only to find herself caught in a supernatural nightmare. She had been afraid, yes, but she had also found strength, courage, power, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. She made her decision. She raised her hand, the silver ring, Alara's ring, still on her finger, glowing faintly in the blood-red moonlight. She looked at the moon, her gaze unwavering, her voice clear and strong, filled with a newfound conviction, a newfound authority. I, Evan the Corbin, she declared, descendant of Seraphina Corbin, guardian of Stillwater Creek, choose to bind myself to the moon, to its power, to its protection. I choose to become the keeper of the balance, the protector of the veil, the guardian of this place, these people. She paused, her gaze shifting to Caspian, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and regret. But I do not choose the soul bond, she said, her voice soft but firm. I choose to love you, Caspian Thorne, freely, willingly, without coercion, without manipulation, without the chains of a curse. She turned back to the moon, her voice rising in strength and intensity. I offer myself, not as a slave, not as a weapon, but as a partner, a protector, a queen. As she spoke the final word, she felt a surge of power, a wave of energy unlike anything she had experienced before. The blood moon seemed to pulse, its light intensifying, its energy flowing into her, through her, merging with her, transforming her. The silver ring on her finger, Alara's ring, the symbol of the curse, the connection, the sacrifice, began to glow brighter, brighter, until it was almost blinding. Then, with a soft, almost imperceptible crack, it shattered, its fragments falling to the ground like shimmering tears, its power released, its purpose fulfilled. Evan felt a sense of liberation, of freedom, of completion. She was no longer just Evan the Corbin, the widow, the outsider. She was something more, something powerful, something moonbound. but on her own terms. She had embraced her destiny, accepted her responsibility, chosen her own path. The power now was not something outside of her, but part of her, intrinsically hers. The voice, the insidious whisper, screamed in rage, in frustration, in defeat, then faded away, silenced by her choice, by her power, by her love. The blood moon began to fade, its red glow receding, replaced by the soft, silvery light of a normal, full moon. The veil between worlds was sealed, the balance restored, the shadow beasts banished, the curse transformed. She lowered her hand, her body trembling, her heart overflowing. She was exhausted, drained, but also exhilarated, empowered, free. She had sacrificed the ring. She had made the choice. She had become the guardian. Caspian, watching in silent awe, slowly approached her. The transformation within him was beginning to recede. The wolf was calming. The man was returning. Chapter 19. Redemption in the face of loss. The aftermath of the blood moon was a scene of quiet devastation and fragile hope. The shattered remnants of Agnes's door lay scattered on the ground, the air still thick with the lingering scent of ozone and the faint, metallic tang of blood. Rowan lay still, his breathing shallow but steady, thanks to Agnes's swift application of herbs and bandages. Finn, shaken but relatively unharmed, kept a watchful vigil over his injured packmate. Caspian stood before Evanna, his golden eyes, now fully human, filled with a mixture of awe, relief, and a profound sadness. The raw power she had wielded, the sacrifice she had made, the choice she had so boldly declared it had changed everything. The curse, as they had known it, was gone, transformed by her will, her strength, her love. "You did it," he said, his voice hoarse, his gaze searching hers. "You saved us all. You saved Stillwater Creek." Evanna nodded, her own body trembling with exhaustion, her heart aching with the loss of the ring, the tangible link to her grandmother, to her past. But it was a loss she had chosen, a sacrifice she had made willingly, for a greater purpose, for a love that transcended the constraints of a forced bond. "We did it together," she said, her voice soft, her gaze meeting his. "We faced the darkness, and we prevailed." She looked at the fragments of the shattered ring, scattered on the ground, shimmering faintly in the moonlight. It was a symbol of the past, of the curse, of the forbidden love, of the tragic endings. But it was also a symbol of her strength, her courage, her choice. She had broken the chain, not by destroying the connection, but by transforming it, by forging a new path, a new destiny. Caspian knelt down, his fingers gently tracing the broken pieces of the ring. "It was your grandmother's," he said, his voice filled with regret. "A piece of your history, your heritage." Evanna knelt beside him, her hand reaching out to touch his, their fingers interlacing. "It was," she said, "but it was also a symbol of a curse, a burden. And now it's free. We're free." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a love that was both fierce and tender, a love that had been forged in the crucible of fear, of sacrifice, of choice. It was a love that was not bound by magic, by destiny, by a forced connection, but by a shared experience, a mutual respect, a deep, abiding understanding. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caspian rose to his feet, pulling her up with him, his gaze never leaving hers. "Now," he said, his voice filled with a newfound hope, "we rebuild. We heal. We learn to live in this new world, this new reality that you have created." He paused, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "And we explore this connection, this love that we have found freely, willingly, without the shadow of the curse hanging over us." Evanna leaned into his touch, her heart overflowing with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a burgeoning love that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She had faced the darkness, she had embraced her power, she had made her choice. And now, she was ready to face the future, whatever it may hold, with Caspian by her side, not as her bound mate, but as her partner, her equal, her love. Agnes, who had been watching them silently, approached, a small smile playing on her lips. "You have done well, Evan the Corbin," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You have honored your ancestors, protected your home, and chosen your own destiny. You are the guardian now, the protector of Stillwater Creek." Evan nodded, accepting the title, the responsibility, with a newfound grace, a newfound confidence. She had earned it. She had embraced it. She had become it. "But the work is not yet done," Agnes continued, her gaze shifting to Caspian. "The pack must be healed, the town must be reassured, the balance must be maintained. There will be challenges, obstacles, new threats to face." Caspian nodded, his expression serious, his golden eyes reflecting the weight of the responsibility that now rested on both of their shoulders. "We're ready," he said, his voice firm. "We'll face them together." He looked at Evan, his gaze filled with a love that was both unwavering and unconditional. "We'll build a new future, a future free from curses, free from fear, free from forced bonds. A future where love, true love, can flourish." Evan smiled, her heart filled with a hope that was both fragile and fierce. She had lost a ring, a symbol of the past, but she had gained so much more. She had gained power, purpose, belonging, and a love that was freely given, freely received, a love that was her own. The redemption wasn't just for Caspian, or the pack, or Stillwater Creek. It was for her too. She had redeemed herself, her past, her future. She was free. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky with hues of pink and gold, chasing away the last vestiges of the blood-red moon, Evan and Caspian stood together, hand in hand, ready to face the new day, the new world, the new love that they had created. Rowan stirred, groaned, and opened his eyes. He blinked, then focused on Evan. He smiled, weakly. "Thank you," he mouthed. She simply nodded, understanding. Chapter 20. The Final Confrontation of Hearts. The days following the blood moon were a blur of activity and healing. Rowan recovered swiftly, his resilience a testament to the strength of the pack bond and Agnes's skillful care. The town of Stillwater Creek, though initially shaken by the strange occurrences of that night, gradually returned to its quiet, unassuming rhythm, reassured by Agnes's calming presence and Yvance's growing confidence. Evan and Caspian worked tirelessly, side by side, rebuilding the shattered remnants of Agnes's cottage, tending to the needs of the pack, and establishing a new sense of order and security in Stillwater Creek. They were a team, a partnership, forged in the crucible of the blood moon, their bond strengthened by shared experience, mutual respect, and a love that was growing deeper, more profound, with each passing day. But the peace was fragile, the calm superficial. Evan knew that the threat of the shadow beasts, though temporarily banished, still lingered in the darkest corners of the world, waiting for an opportunity to return. She could feel it, a faint, unsettling presence, a whisper in the wind, a shadow in the periphery of her vision. She also knew that her connection to the moon, though now a source of strength and protection, was also a beacon, a lure for any creature of darkness that sought to exploit its power. She was the guardian, the protector, but she was also a target. And then there was Caspian. Their love, though freely chosen, unburdened by the curse, was still new, still fragile, still untested. They had faced the darkness together. They had fought for their freedom, for their future, but they had yet to truly confront the complexities of their relationship, the differences in their natures, the challenges of bridging the gap between their two worlds. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Evan and Caspian found themselves standing by the creek, the same place where their journey had begun, the same place where they had faced the blood moon's ultimatum. "It's beautiful," Evan said, her voice soft, her gaze fixed on the swirling water, reflecting the vibrant colors of the sky. Caspian nodded, his arms slipping around her waist, drawing her closer to him. "It is," he said, "but not as beautiful as you." Evan smiled, leaning into his touch, her heart filled with a warmth that chased away the lingering chill of the evening air. She loved him. She knew that now, without a doubt, without reservation. But she also knew that love, true love, was not just about passion, about connection, about shared experiences. It was also about honesty, about vulnerability, about confronting the shadows that lingered within themselves, within their relationship. "Caspian," she said, her voice hesitant, her gaze shifting to meet his. "We need to talk." Caspian's expression turned serious, his golden eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and understanding. "I know," he said, his voice low and even. "We've been avoiding it, haven't we?" Evana nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been putting off this conversation, this confrontation, fearing that it would shatter the fragile peace they had found, that it would reveal the cracks in their relationship, the differences that might ultimately tear them apart. "I love you, Caspian," she said, her voice trembling, her gaze unwavering. "But I'm not sure I understand what that means, not completely. Not for us." Caspian's hand tightened around her waist, his touch both reassuring and possessive. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of fear. "We're so different," Evana said, her voice gaining strength. "You're a werewolf, a creature of the night, bound to the moon, to your pack. I'm a woman, a human, who has only recently discovered this hidden world, this hidden power within myself." She paused, her gaze searching his. "I'm the guardian, the protector, yes, but I'm also just Evana. I have my own life, my own desires, my own fears." Caspian nodded, his expression softening, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding understanding. "I know," he said, his voice soft, his gaze unwavering. "And I love you for it, Evana. For all of it. The strength, the vulnerability, the human, the guardian." He paused, his hand reaching out to cup her cheek, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I know I can be intense, possessive, even. It's the wolf in me, the instinct to protect, to claim, to bind." He smiled, a wry, self-deprecating smile. "But I'm learning, Evana. I'm learning to control it, to temper it, to respect your boundaries, your freedom, your choice." Evana leaned into his touch, her heart overflowing with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a love that was deepening, solidifying, with each honest word, each vulnerable confession. "And I'm learning to embrace the wolf," she said, her voice soft, her gaze meeting his. "To understand your nature, your instincts, your power." She paused, her hand reaching out to touch his, her fingers tracing the faint scars on his skin, the reminders of the battles he had fought, the sacrifices he had made. "I'm not afraid of you, Caspian," she said, her voice firm, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not afraid of the darkness, not anymore. I'm not afraid of us." Caspian's eyes filled with tears, tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love that was both fierce and tender, a love that had been tested, challenged, and ultimately strengthened. "I love you, Evan Corbin," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "More than words can say, more than life itself." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future. It was a kiss that acknowledged their differences, their challenges, their fears, but also celebrated their strength, their courage, their choice. It was a kiss that marked the beginning of their new journey, their new life, together as partners, as equals, as lovers. They had faced the darkness, they had embraced their power, they had chosen their own destiny. And now, they were ready to face the future, whatever it may hold, together, hand in hand, heart to heart, bound not by a curse, but by a love that was freely given, freely received, a love that was their own. The final confrontation was not with a beast, or magic, or an ancient enemy. It was the honest, loving confrontation of two hearts finally understanding each other, accepting each other, choosing each other freely. Epilogue. The years that followed were a testament to the strength of their love, the resilience of their bond, the power of their choice. Evana and Caspian, together, rebuilt Stillwater Creek, not just physically, but spiritually, transforming it into a haven, a sanctuary, a place where the human and the supernatural could coexist, could thrive, could love. Agnes, her wisdom and guidance ever present, watched over them, a silent guardian, a proud mentor, her heart filled with a quiet joy, a deep satisfaction, knowing that she had played her part in shaping their destiny, in securing the future of Stillwater Creek. Rowan and Finn, healed and strengthened, remained loyal members of the pack, their bond with Caspian and Evan the deepened by the shared experience of the Blood Moon, by the sacrifices they had made, by the new world they had helped to create. The shadow beasts, banished but not forgotten, remained a distant threat, a whisper in the darkness, a reminder of the constant vigilance required to maintain the balance, to protect the veil, to keep Stillwater Creek safe. But Evan the guardian, the protector, the keeper of the balance, was ready. She had embraced her power, her responsibility, her destiny, not as a burden, but as a gift, a calling, a purpose. She had learned to harness the moon's energy, to channel its force, to wield it with both strength and compassion, with both wisdom and love. And Caspian, her partner, her equal, her love, was always by her side, his golden eyes reflecting the moon's light, his heart beating in time with hers, his love a constant source of strength, of comfort, of joy. He had learned to temper his wolfish instincts, to respect her boundaries, her freedom, her choice, to love her not as a possession, but as a partner, an equal, a soulmate. They had children, 2 beautiful daughters, Luna and Willow, who inherited both their parents' strengths, their courage, their magic. Luna, with her mother's dark hair and her father's golden eyes, possessed a connection to the moon, a gift for healing, a destiny to follow in her mother's footsteps. Willow, with her father's dark hair and her mother's captivating eyes, possessed a connection to the earth, a gift for nurturing, a destiny to bridge the gap between the human and the supernatural. They raised their daughters in Stillwater Creek, surrounded by love, by magic, by the beauty of the Appalachian Mountains, teaching them the importance of choice, of responsibility, of love. They taught them the history of the Corbins and the Thorns, the story of Seraphina and Alaric, the tragedy of the moonbound curse, the triumph of the blood moon, the power of free will. And as the years turned into decades, as Evanna and Caspian watched their daughters grow, their love for each other deepened, strengthened, solidified, becoming a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of choice, of sacrifice, of love. They had faced the darkness, they had embraced their power, they had chosen their own destiny. And they had found, in each other, a love that was stronger than magic, stronger than fate, stronger than time itself. They lived, not forever, for Evanna remained mortal, but they lived fully, deeply, honestly. Their love a shining example for all of Stillwater Creek, a testament to the enduring power of the human and the wolf heart. When Evanna finally passed, peacefully, in her sleep, many, many years later, Caspian followed only a few weeks after. They were buried together, side by side, beneath the largest oak tree near Stillwater Creek, where the moonlight always seemed to shine the brightest. The end.